a soothing adaptation of the Jungle Book. Bagheera's silent strength. The jungle at dusk was a world of shifting shadows and whispered secrets. The setting sun cast long streaks of gold and crimson through the dense canopy, creating a patchwork of light and darkness on the forest floor. Mowgli crouched behind a thick bush, his small frame hidden within the undergrowth. His sharp eyes followed Bagheera, the sleek black panther, as he moved effortlessly through the jungle. Bagheera was more than just a creature of the jungle. He was its spirit incarnate. His midnight black coat seemed to drink in the fading light, making him almost invisible. Only the faint glimmer of his golden eyes betrayed his presence, like two embers glowing in the shadows. Mowgli marveled at how Bagheera's movements were both powerful and silent, as though the jungle itself had parted to let him pass. The panther's muscular body was a masterpiece of strength and grace. Every step was deliberate, every motion precise. His large paws touched the ground soundlessly, and his tail, long and sinuous, swayed gently behind him. Mowgli watched, fascinated, as Bagheera paused under a low-hanging branch, his body perfectly still. In that moment, he seemed less like an animal and more like a shadow given life. Mowgli's heart raced as he tried to follow Bagheera's path with his eyes. The panther melted into the jungle, disappearing and reappearing with the play of light and shadow. Mowgli realized that even the slightest flicker of movement could betray his presence. But Bagheera had mastered the art of blending into his surroundings. It was as if the jungle had claimed him as its own, hiding him from the world. "Bagheera," Mowgli whispered, barely audible. "How do you move like that? I can't even hear your footsteps." The panther turned his golden eyes toward the boy, a faint smile curling his lips. "It is not just about being quiet, man-cub," he said, his voice low and steady. "It is about becoming one with the jungle. You must listen to it, feel its rhythm, and move as it moves." Mowgli furrowed his brows, trying to understand. But how do you know where to step? How do you not make a sound? Bagheera padded closer to him, his gaze sharp and knowing. "The jungle is alive, Mowgli. Every leaf, every branch, every stone has its place. When you respect that, when you move with purpose, the jungle will guide you." Mowgli nodded, his curiosity growing. He tried to mimic Bagheera's movements, placing his feet carefully on the soft ground. But every step seemed to crack a twig or disturb the leaves. Frustrated, he looked up at the panther. Bagheera chuckled softly, the sound a deep rumble in his throat. "Patience, man-cub. It is not something you learn in a single night. Watch and learn." The panther turned and continued his silent trek through the jungle, his form blending seamlessly with the twilight. Mowgli followed, his steps clumsy in comparison, but he kept his focus on Bagheera. The panther's confidence and control were mesmerizing. He moved with an elegance that seemed almost supernatural, as though he was part of the shadows themselves. As they ventured deeper into the jungle, Mowgli began to notice how Bagheera used the environment to his advantage. A low branch became a perch, a patch of dense foliage a hiding place. Every element of the jungle was a tool, a shield, or a path, and Bagheera wielded them all with quiet mastery. For Mowgli, it was a revelation. He had always seen the jungle as a wild, chaotic place, but through Bagheera's eyes, he began to see its order, its purpose. Panther's silent strength was not just in his physical power, but in his understanding of the jungle's language, a language Mowgli was only beginning to learn. As the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Mowgli felt a deep respect for Bagheera. The panther was a protector, a guide, and a teacher, all rolled into one. His silence spoke volumes, and his strength was not just in his body, but in his calm, unshakable presence. Mowgli realized that to survive in the jungle, he would need to embrace these lessons, to become one with the shadows, just as Bagheera had. For now, he was content to follow and observe, knowing that with time, he too might learn the art of moving like the jungle's silent guardian. The jungle was alive with the sounds of evening. Crickets chirped in steady rhythm. Leaves rustled softly in the gentle breeze. And somewhere in the distance, a bird called out, its voice echoing faintly through the trees. Mowgli and Bagheera stood in the shadows of a dense grove, the panther's golden eyes glowing faintly in the fading light. Stealth, man-cub, is more than moving silently, Bagheera began, his voice a low rumble that seemed to blend with the jungle's sounds. It is about becoming part of the jungle itself, to disappear into its rhythm, to move as it moves, without disturbing its harmony. Mowgli nodded, his eyes wide with curiosity. But how do I do that? He asked, glancing down at his bare feet. Every time I take a step, I make noise. Bagheera's lips curled into a faint smile. That is because you are thinking only of your feet. Stealth begins not with your steps, but with your senses. The panther gestured for Mowgli to sit, and the boy obeyed, settling onto a patch of soft moss. Bagheera crouched beside him, his sleek form blending effortlessly with the shadows. Close your eyes, Bagheera instructed. Listen. What do you hear? Mowgli shut his eyes and focused, his brows furrowing in concentration. At first, all he could make out was the buzzing of insects and the distant murmur of the wind. But as he listened longer, he began to pick out more. Branches creaking under the weight of a bird, the faint rustle of a lizard moving through the undergrowth, the rhythmic drip of water from a leaf. I hear everything, Mowgli said, his voice tinged with wonder. Good, Bagheera said. Now, let the sounds guide you. Every step you take should match the rhythm of the jungle. If you move when the jungle moves, you will not disturb it. Bagheera rose gracefully, his movements fluid and soundless. Stand, he said, and Mowgli quickly got to his feet. We will practice. Follow me, and try to match my steps. The panther began to move, his paws touching the ground with deliberate precision. Mowgli watched carefully, mimicking the way Bagheera placed his feet. Heel first, then the toes, pressing lightly into the earth. His first few steps were clumsy, and the crunch of leaves beneath his feet made him wince. Slowly, man-cub, Bagheera said without turning. Patience is your ally. Do not rush. Mowgli slowed his pace, focusing on each movement. He stepped only where Bagheera stepped, his bare feet finding patches of soft moss or bare earth instead of dry leaves. Gradually, his movements grew quieter, more deliberate. As they wove through the jungle, Bagheera pointed out the ways in which the environment could aid them. See that tree? He said, gesturing to a large banyan with low-hanging roots. Its roots can hide you, and its branches can shield you. A good hiding place is as important as a quiet step. Mowgli studied the tree, noting the dense curtain of roots and the way its massive trunk cast deep shadows. He realized that the jungle offered countless such hiding places, if only he learned to recognize them. They continued on, Bagheera leading Mowgli to a shallow stream. "Water masks sound," the panther explained. "If you need to move quickly, do so near a stream or a river. The sound of the water will cover your steps." Mowgli crouched beside the stream, his fingers brushing the cool surface. He could see how the rushing water would drown out the noise of footsteps, making it easier to move unnoticed. For the next hour, Bagheera put Mowgli through a series of exercises. He had the boy practice stepping carefully, crouching low to avoid being seen, and using rocks, trees, and bushes to stay hidden. Each time Mowgli made a mistake, stepping on a twig or moving too quickly, Bagheera corrected him with patient guidance. "Stealth is not just about hiding," Bagheera said, as they rested beneath a large tree. "It is about understanding your surroundings. The jungle will guide you if you let it, but you must be willing to listen." Mowgli nodded, wiping the sweat from his brow. "It's harder than it looks," he admitted, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Indeed," Bagheera replied, his eyes gleaming with approval. "But you are learning, man-cub. And that is what matters." As the sky darkened and the first stars began to appear, Bagheera led Mowgli back to the clearing where they had started. The boy's steps were quieter now, his movements more controlled. He felt a sense of accomplishment, though he knew he still had much to learn. "Stealth is a skill that requires time," Bagheera said, as they stopped beneath the towering trees. "But you have taken your first steps. Remember, patience is as important as silence. The jungle rewards those who move with care." Mowgli looked up at the panther, admiration shining in his eyes. "Thank you, Bagheera. I'll keep practicing. I want to move like you someday." Bagheera's expression softened, and he placed a paw gently on Mowgli's shoulder. "You will, man-cub. In time, you will." The two stood in the shadowy embrace of the jungle, the sounds of the night wrapping around them like a protective cocoon. Mowgli felt a quiet determination take root within him. He knew the path ahead would not be easy, but with Bagheera's guidance, he was ready to face it. The jungle had grown darker, the canopy overhead thickening until only slivers of moonlight pierced through. The once gentle sounds of the jungle now seemed sharper, more immediate. Mowgli trailed behind Bagheera, his steps quieter than before, thanks to the lessons he had just learned. Still, his youthful curiosity occasionally distracted him. A rustle here, a glimmer there, and Bagheera's low voice would remind him, "Focus, man-cub." The air grew heavier as they ventured deeper into the dense forest. The trees stood closer together, their twisted roots creating uneven paths. Mowgli's senses were heightened. Every snap of a twig or sudden movement in the shadows made his heart race. Yet Bagheera moved with the same calm grace, his body blending seamlessly with the darkness. "Stay close," Bagheera murmured, his golden eyes scanning their surroundings. "The jungle is different at night. Some creatures wake only now, and they are not all friendly." Mowgli nodded, swallowing the lump of unease in his throat. He trusted Bagheera completely, but the growing silence of the jungle made him uneasy. Even the crickets seemed to have fallen quiet, as if holding their breath. As they rounded a cluster of tall ferns, Bagheera suddenly froze. His body became perfectly still, his ears twitching slightly. Mowgli stopped mid-step, his heart pounding as he watched the panther's intense focus. "What is it?" Mowgli whispered, barely audible. Bagheera's gaze shifted to the right, his nostrils flaring as he sniffed the air. "We are not alone," he said, his voice low and steady. "There's a predator nearby." Mowgli's stomach tightened, his fingers instinctively clutching a nearby tree trunk. He strained his ears, trying to hear what Bagheera had sensed. At first, there was nothing, only the distant rustling of leaves. But then he caught it. A faint, almost imperceptible growl, low and menacing, coming from the shadows ahead. "Is it Shere Khan?" Mowgli asked, his voice trembling. Bagheera shook his head slightly, his eyes never leaving the darkness. "No, not him. But it doesn't matter. Any predator in this part of the jungle is dangerous." "What do we do?" Mowgli asked, his breath quickening. Bagheera turned to him, his expression calm but firm. "We move carefully, slowly, no sudden movements. Stay behind me and do exactly as I say." Mowgli nodded, his heart hammering in his chest. Bagheera's composure was both reassuring and astonishing. Even in the face of danger, the panther's movements were deliberate, his voice steady. Mowgli took a deep breath, willing himself to mimic Bagheera's calm. They began to move, Bagheera leading the way with calculated precision. His body seemed to melt into the shadows, his paws making no sound against the forest floor. Mowgli followed, stepping where Bagheera stepped, his senses straining to pick up any sign of the lurking predator. The growl came again, this time closer. Mowgli's breath hitched, and his instinct was to run. But Bagheera stopped and turned to him, his gaze piercing. "Do not run," he said firmly. "Running will make you prey. Stand your ground." Mowgli swallowed hard, nodding. His legs felt weak, but he stood still, focusing on Bagheera's steady presence. The predator revealed itself moments later. From the shadows emerged a wild boar, its tusks gleaming in the faint light. Its small, beady eyes glared at them, and its bristling fur stood on end. It was clear the animal felt threatened, its posture aggressive and ready to charge. Mowgli's heart raced. The boar was massive, its bulk intimidating, and the thought of its sharp tusks made his knees wobble. "Bagheera," he began, but the panther cut him off with a soft growl. "Stay still," Bagheera said, his voice calm but commanding. "Do not show fear." The boar pawed at the ground, its snout twitching as it sniffed the air. Bagheera slowly lowered his body, his muscles coiled but relaxed, his eyes locked on the boar. He didn't move forward or backward. He simply held his ground, his calm presence an unspoken challenge. Mowgli marveled at Bagheera's stillness. The panther's strength wasn't in his size or his claws, but in his unwavering confidence. Even in the face of a charging predator, Bagheera exuded control. The boar huffed, stomping the ground, but it didn't advance. It seemed uncertain, its aggression tempered by Bagheera's calm dominance. After a tense moment, the animal let out a sharp snort and backed away, retreating into the shadows. Mowgli let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His legs felt like jelly, and he leaned against the tree for support. "We scared it off?" he asked, his voice shaking. "No," Bagheera replied, his eyes still fixed on the shadows. "We showed it that we are not a threat, but neither are we easy prey." The boar chose to leave, just as we chose to stand our ground. Mowgli nodded, his admiration for Bagheera growing with every passing moment. "How did you stay so calm?" he asked. "Weren't you scared?" Bagheera finally turned to him, his golden eyes softening. "Of course, I was. Fear is natural, Mowgli, but letting fear control you is what makes you weak. In the jungle, strength comes not from the absence of fear, but from the ability to act despite it." Mowgli considered this, his breathing slowly returning to normal. "So, you stayed calm because you controlled your fear?" Bagheera nodded. "Exactly. Fear can be a useful tool, but only if you master it. Otherwise, it will master you." The panther straightened, his sleek form silhouetted against the dim light. "Come, man-cub. We should keep moving." The jungle is not without its dangers, but with patience and awareness, you can face them. Mowgli followed Bagheera, his steps quieter now, his body more attuned to the jungle around him. The encounter with the boar had shaken him, but it had also taught him an invaluable lesson. Bagheera's strength wasn't just in his powerful body or sharp claws. It was in his calm, unyielding presence. It was a kind of strength Mowgli aspired to. As they continued through the forest, Mowgli felt a newfound respect for the jungle and its rules. He realized that survival wasn't just about strength or speed. It was about understanding, patience, and quiet resilience. And as long as Bagheera was by his side, he knew he had the best teacher to guide him. The jungle symphony returned as they moved farther from the boar's territory. Crickets chirped, and the distant hoot of an owl echoed through the trees. The stars above twinkled faintly, their light piercing the thick canopy. For the first time, Mowgli felt a sense of belonging, not just to Bagheera, but to the jungle itself. It was a place of danger and beauty, and he was slowly learning how to navigate its intricate rhythms. Bagheera glanced back at him, a faint smile on his lips, as if sensing Mowgli's growing confidence. "You did well, man-cub," Bagheera said softly. "Tonight, you learned more than just stealth. You learned the power of staying calm. Remember that, and the jungle will always respect you." Mowgli smiled, his heart swelling with pride. He didn't feel like a helpless boy anymore. With Bagheera by his side, he was beginning to feel like a true creature of the jungle. Together, they disappeared into the shadows, the jungle embracing them once more. The jungle was bathed in silvery moonlight as Mowgli and Bagheera continued their journey. The boy's heart still pounded from the earlier encounter with the wild boar. His mind replayed the moment over and over, the boar's intimidating tusks, its aggressive stance, and most of all, Bagheera's unshakable calm. Mowgli couldn't understand how the panther had remained so composed in the face of such danger. "Bagheera," Mowgli said after a stretch of silence, his voice tinged with hesitation. "Weren't you scared back there? The boar could have charged at us." Bagheera glanced back at him, his golden eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. "Of course, I was scared," he replied, his voice steady. "Fear is natural, man-cub. It's the jungle's way of keeping us alert and alive. But fear is not the enemy. It's how you handle it that matters." Mowgli furrowed his brows, his steps slowing as he processed Bagheera's words. "But how do you stop it from taking over? When I saw that boar, I felt like running away. I couldn't think of anything else." Bagheera stopped and turned to face Mowgli, his sleek form blending with the shadows around him. You cannot stop fear from coming, but you can control what you do when it arrives. Fear is like the wind. It can push you forward or throw you off balance. The choice is yours. Mowgli tilted his head, his curiosity growing. But how do I choose? It feels so strong, like it's bigger than me. Bagheera's lips curled into a faint smile. "Let me show you," he said. "Close your eyes and remember the boar. Picture it standing there, its tusks gleaming, its breath heavy. Feel the fear." Mowgli hesitated, but eventually did as Bagheera instructed. The memory came rushing back, the boar's intimidating size, its eyes glaring with hostility. His chest tightened, and his breath quickened. "Good," Bagheera said softly. "Now, take a deep breath. Feel the fear, but do not let it control you. Imagine it as a fire inside you. You can let it burn wildly, or you can contain it." Mowgli took a shaky breath, then another, longer one. He imagined the fear as a flame, flickering and roaring. But instead of feeding it, he pictured himself placing a glass over it, containing its heat without letting it spread. Slowly, his chest loosened, and his breathing steadied. "Better," Bagheera said, his voice approving. "Fear is not meant to paralyze you, Mowgli. It is meant to sharpen your senses. The trick is to focus on what you can do, not on what you cannot control." Mowgli opened his eyes, a new understanding dawning on his face. "So, you weren't fearless back there. You just didn't let it show." Bagheera nodded. "Exactly. Fear is not weakness. Even the strongest creatures feel it. What makes them strong is their ability to use it, not to succumb to it. The jungle has accepted you, and you are becoming a part of it." The two stood in silence for a moment, the bond between them unspoken but strong. The moonlight cast long shadows across the clearing, and the jungle's nighttime symphony surrounded them, a soothing melody of crickets, rustling leaves, and distant water. Finally, Bagheera stepped back, his sleek form blending into the shadows. "Rest well, man-cub. The jungle will watch over you tonight, as will the stars." Mowgli nodded, his chest swelling with a mixture of pride and determination. "Good night, Bagheera," he said, his voice soft but confident. With a graceful leap, Bagheera disappeared into the undergrowth, his movements silent as a whisper. Mowgli stood for a moment, watching the spot where the panther had vanished. Though he was alone now, he didn't feel abandoned. Instead, he felt a quiet strength growing within him, a sense of belonging he hadn't known before. He turned toward a nearby tree, its roots forming a natural hollow that offered shelter. As he settled down, the cool earth beneath him and the canopy above felt less intimidating and more like home. The jungle's sounds wrapped around him, a gentle reminder that he was part of something much larger. Mowgli lay back, his eyes fixed on the stars twinkling through the gaps in the branches. Each point of light seemed to hold a promise, a lesson yet to be learned. He thought about the day, the way Bagheera had faced danger with calm resilience, the lessons about fear and patience, and the unspoken wisdom of the jungle itself. The jungle's lullaby, a mix of whispers and hums, soothed him as sleep began to take hold. He knew the path ahead would not always be easy, but he also knew he wasn't the same boy who had once been afraid of the jungle. He was learning, growing, and finding his place. Under the watchful eyes of the stars and the gentle embrace of the jungle, Mowgli drifted into a peaceful sleep. And though Bagheera was no longer by his side, the panther's strength and wisdom stayed with him, a quiet guide in the heart of the wild. As you close your eyes, let the echoes of this story guide you to peace. Drift gently into sleep, knowing you are part of a world where love and wisdom shine bright. May your dreams be calm, comforting, and filled with wonder.